My name's Craig Rideout. What happened? I wake up at midnight with a sharp pain in my arm. I jump up. This will sound crazy. A hooded black figure, not a black man, was running out of the room. The reason I have to file a police report is my BlackBerry, which was taken that night.
On the afternoon of July 20th, 2016, just a few days after this 911 call was placed, a woman by the name of Robin Drew called 911 in Rochester, New York, to report her brother, Craig Rideout, had suddenly stopped responding to her calls and texts. They'd routinely speak over the phone daily, and because it wasn't like him at all to just not respond, Robin had a terrible feeling that something may have happened to him. Rochester police were quickly dispatched and met Robin outside of her brother's house to gather information. They learned that 50-year-old Craig Rideout was a software engineer and a father of 7 kids. He'd recently moved into his new home after he was handed divorce papers by his wife Laura. Detectives were called in and arrived at the scene with a search warrant for the home. Just as they were about to walk in with Robin, a car pulled up to Craig's house. It was Craig's wife Laura and her 2 youngest children, aged 6 and 12. Laura tells detectives that she came to the house earlier that morning to pick up the kids and was bringing them back to Craig's house as planned. Detectives gained entry and started walking through the house. Everything seemed to be in order at first. The house was neat and tidy, and nothing looked out of place. Officers then made their way downstairs into the basement. At first glance, the basement looked a little messy, but nothing really stood out. But upon closer inspection, they spotted something alarming. Blood spatter was found on boxes, plastic containers, and shelving units. The crime scene unit was called in and sprayed the basement with luminol. They found even more bloodstains that someone had apparently attempted to wipe off the floor. Officers continued sifting through Craig's belongings and made another shocking discovery. Inside of a trash bag was a makeshift garrote, a weapon used to strangle someone from behind, blood-soaked paper towels that were apparently used to wipe the blood on the floor, and heavy-duty leather work gloves, which were also soaked in blood. None of this was looking good, and police needed to track down Craig. They took his phone number down from Robin and called it multiple times. His phone rang, but nobody was picking up. About 50 miles away in Yates County, a farmer was riding his bicycle down a desolate road earlier that morning when something strange caught his attention. He spotted what appeared to be dark blood stains along the shoulder of the road. The farmer stopped his bike to get a closer look and found fresh tire tracks in the dirt and a trail of blood leading into a heavily wooded area. He followed the trail into the woods, and it led him to a brush partially covering what looked like a brown tarp that was tightly rolled up. The farmer immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. They lifted the tarp and found the deceased body of what appeared to be a male. The face was unrecognizable as a result of flesh having been dissolved with some type of acid. Whatever substance was used was so powerful that it ate through his clothes, plastic buttons, and straight through his skin. Near the body, they found what looked like plastic seals that were likely removed from the bottles of acid used to disfigure the victim. A small shallow hole was found in the dirt nearby, along with a brand new shovel, indicating that there was an intent to bury the body. Whoever was behind this likely abandoned this idea after realizing that straight-edge shovels don't work well with compacted soil. As investigators leaned over the body to get a closer look at it, a phone rang, but it wasn't coming from either of their phones. They reached into the victim's pocket, pulled out his phone, and answered the call. On the other end was one of the officers at Craig's house, trying to reach him. The medical examiner's report came in and confirmed the body to be Craig's. It also confirmed that he was, in fact, strangled to death. Detectives got to work and requested Craig's cell phone data from his carrier. They plotted his location throughout the day he was murdered and were able to map the route taken from his home and all the way to where his body was disposed of in the woods. Officers drove down that route and were able to locate multiple security cameras installed along the way. They collected hundreds of hours of footage and brought it back to the station to begin the tedious task of going through it all to try and identify the vehicle used to transport Craig's body. The first camera is installed outside of a motel located about halfway between Craig's house and his burial site. Shortly after 3 a.m., a dark-colored vehicle can be seen driving down the empty road, followed by another vehicle. Because there's virtually no traffic on the road that early in the morning, police suspect that these two cars are traveling in convoy. They fast forward the footage a few hours to see if the cars were captured returning down that same road. The sun is now out, so the camera should show a better image of the vehicles. The same two cars can be seen driving back. It's a dark-colored sedan, closely followed by a minivan that looks strikingly similar to the one Craig owned. Detectives played footage from a few more cameras along the route and found both cars traveling together at all times, confirming that there were at least two people involved in Craig's murder, but they eventually lose track of the vehicles and can't locate where they ended up at. Detectives turned to the physical evidence found near Craig's body. The shovel used in an attempt to dig his grave looked brand new, as if it had been purchased very recently. It also had a UPC code, which gave police a starting point to search for the store that sold it. They compiled a list of stores around Craig's house that carried that particular shovel, and within the week leading up to Craig's murder, only a single one was sold. It happened to be sold at the Walmart closest to Craig's house on the night before he was murdered. Police headed straight to the Walmart and requested to see the footage from that night. Shortly after midnight, a dark sedan pulls up to the front of the store. It looks very much like the one caught by the other surveillance cameras. After about a minute, someone exits the rear door and heads into the store. A camera located just past the entrance captures a better image. As the man walks into the store, detectives immediately recognize him. It's Craig's oldest son, Colin Rideout. They follow him as he walks through the store, picking up items, then to a cash register where he places them on the conveyor. It's the shovel that was found near Craig's body, and 4 pairs of heavy-duty work gloves, the same ones found at Craig's house. Colin takes his items and exits the store, and then heads to the car that dropped him off. Detectives played back the footage from the camera near the entrance. As Colin enters the store, the car that dropped him off pulls away, and 3 other people can be seen inside. The driver and a passenger next to them, as well as a third person sitting in the back seat. They tried zooming in and enhancing the footage, but couldn't make out who else was in the vehicle. Police now have 3 more suspects that they need to identify. Just as detectives were about to wrap up their work for the day, they received a call from officers on patrol nearby. The officers say that they just responded to a call at a place called Devil's Bathtub and that it might be related to this case. A woman called the police and said that she was taking a walk through the park when she spotted something suspicious. She watched 2 men remove garbage bags from the trunk of their car and carry them to the pond, where they dumped them into the water. By the time detectives arrived at the scene, they found responding officers had already located the 2 men and had them separated. Detectives immediately recognized them as Colin Rideout and his younger brother, Alex. As they walked over to them, they pulled out their phones and started recording. Detectives start asking each of them about their father and whether they were worried that he wasn't responding.
So what's going on? You and your brother were out for a walk?
I mean, we were just like out and then suddenly people show up and it's like, well, I've never really encountered police before, so it was like,
How old are you?
I'm doing college next year. He'd always threaten, oh, I could just disappear. And I figured he was on the next flight to Mexico.
Have you heard anything from your dad?
Well, I emailed him last night. I didn't hear from him. I've been kind of worried about him for, stuff's just been freaking me out.
A few minutes into the conversation, firefighters arrive to retrieve the bags from the pond, and the detective asks him what he's about to find in them.
Tell me what's in that bag before I see what's in that bag. It'll be better for you.
You know, I don't know what's in the bag.
Officers open the bags and find blood-soaked clothes and 4 bottles of drain cleaner, which were likely the substance used to disfigure Craig's face. Colin and Alex were both arrested for tampering with evidence and were held in custody while detectives continued their investigation. Police now have 2 of the 4 people they believe to be involved in Craig's murder, but they don't believe that Colin and Alex were the masterminds behind it, and they need to identify the other 2 suspects. Using the UPC codes on the bottles of drain cleaner, officers were able to trace the purchase back to another Walmart, just 2 days before Craig was murdered. They start the footage at the time the purchase was made, and once again, they find Colin checking out the items at the register. They switch to the footage by the exit and spot someone else that they recognize. Just after Colin exits the store, a woman can be seen walking out just a short distance behind him. It's Colin's mother and Craig's wife, Laura Rideout. Detectives rewind the footage about 20 minutes and spot Colin entering the store alongside his mother. They walk through the store together and pick out items, which include the drain cleaner used on Craig's body. Police can now tie Laura to the murder, but they still need to identify the fourth person who was in the car with them. They go back to the physical evidence and trace the brown tarp Craig's body was wrapped in back to another Walmart. They start playing the footage at around 9 p.m., just before the tarp was purchased. The automatic doors slide open, and in walk 2 shoppers. It's Laura Rideout and her new boyfriend, Paul Tucci. They walk around the store and pick out bananas and some other things, as well as the brown tarp, before checking out and exiting the store. Police believe that they now have all 4 suspects and arrest both Laura Rideout and Paul Tucci. But they still need to figure out what compelled Craig's own family to get together and conspire to murder him. All 4 suspects pleaded not guilty and took their cases to trial separately, with each pointing the finger at the others. After a thorough investigation, prosecutors presented the circumstances which led Craig's family to plot his murder and laid out all the evidence to prove it. Craig and Laura married in 1993 and had their first son Colin, followed by 3 girls and then 3 more boys, starting with Alex. As the provider of a family of 9, Craig worked long hours, so much so that he barely had time to spend with his wife and children, which caused a rift in the family. His kids grew closer to their mother, and the family's financial stress took a toll on Craig's marriage. According to his friends and family, Craig was a very patient man and tried his best to keep his family from falling apart. One way he coped with his stress was by playing computer games, while Laura found a different way to deal with her issues. Towards the end of their marriage, Laura started to confide in Paul Tucci and would vent to him about her problems with Craig. Paul also had his own problems at home. His wife was dying of liver disease, and he would likewise confide in Laura. Paul and Laura found comfort in one another, and their relationship eventually turned intimate. The only problem, though, was that Paul happened to be Craig's best friend. By the summer of 2014, Craig's marriage reached a breaking point when Laura handed him divorce papers to sign. As devastating as it may have been for Craig, he didn't express any bitterness toward anyone. According to Paul Tucci, Craig even sent him an email wishing him well. It seemed like Craig and his family would keep an amicable relationship despite the betrayal he must have felt, but this wouldn't last for too long. 2 years after initiating their divorce, Laura and Paul decided to move down south to North Carolina and start a new life together. The only issue was that Laura wanted to take the children with her, all 7 of them. The older kids were old enough to make their own decisions, and they all chose to stay with their mother. But Craig wanted to try to salvage his relationship with his 2 youngest children, who were still underage. He wasn't going to let Laura take them away from him, and before long, Laura found herself in a bitter custody battle. The judge gave Craig temporary custody of the children, and it was looking like he'd soon be awarded full custody. This put a wrench in Laura's plans for a fresh start, and she wasn't very happy. Prosecutors argued that she was so angered by this that she turned her kids against their father and did everything she could to sabotage his custody rights. Laura hatched a plan with her son Colin. Text messages revealed that Colin had instructed 2 of his sisters to try and provoke Craig to make him look abusive and unfit to take custody of his kids. In one of those texts, Colin says, "Tell them you're afraid your dad is going to kill your younger siblings when he gets home." In another message, he says, "Don't hesitate to call 911 if he's ever screaming, because that would play well in court." But Craig was a patient man, and these provocations didn't work on him. By the summer of 2016, Laura and Paul had already signed a lease for an apartment and had started packing for their move to North Carolina. In a last-ditch effort to provoke Craig, Colin tried one last thing. In July of that year, Craig suddenly woke up in the middle of the night when he felt a sharp pain on his arm. As soon as he opened his eyes, he spotted someone dressed in all black running out of his room. When he noticed his phone and his keys were missing, he called 911 to report the incident and told the police he believed his son Colin was behind it. Craig always had a strong bond with his sister Robin. Throughout this ordeal, Robin was always there for him and would talk to him every day to try and help him work through his problems. On the morning of July 20th, Robin noticed that Craig wasn't responding. This worried her, and she left work to stop by his house and check up on him. When she walked in, she found someone standing in the kitchen. It was Lauren, wiping down Craig's countertops. Robin knew something wasn't right, since Laura was not allowed in Craig's house on orders of the court. Laura told Robin that she was there to pick up the kids for the day and that she hasn't seen Craig at all. The kids told Robin that they woke up to find their father had left them alone in the house, which Robin knew was not something he would do. And that's when she called the police. Prosecutors alleged that when it was looking like Craig was getting custody of the kids, Laura conspired with Paul Tucci and her two oldest boys to murder him. They believe that on the night Craig was murdered, Colin once again broke into his house in the middle of the night while Craig and his kids were asleep. He apparently went down to the basement and made a noise to lure Craig down there. Once Craig was in the basement, Colin caught him from behind with the garrote and strangled him and beat him to death. Prosecutors argue that after killing Craig, Colin let Alex and Laura, and possibly Paul, into the house. They claimed that Alex helped Colin get rid of the body, while Laura stayed behind to clean up the mess. By the time she was finishing up, she found Robin walking into the house and told her that she just arrived to pick up the kids. The jury was presented with overwhelming evidence to back up these allegations, including the hours of video recovered from the Walmart stores that showed the defendants purchasing the items related to Craig's murder, and the footage showing Craig's body being transported to his burial site. When police recovered the trash bags from the pond, they found a wealth of evidence inside, which included shoes, Colin and Laura's jeans, and bottles of drain cleaner, matching the plastic seals found near Craig's body, all covered in Craig's blood. The bags also contained DNA from Colin and Laura. Police executed a search of Paul Tucci's house, where Laura and her kids were also living, and found a lot more evidence there, including the car keys that were stolen from Craig's house during the first break-in, the same type of bungee cords used to wrap the tarp, and duct tape that was identical to the one used to make the garrote that killed Craig. Defense attorneys responded by claiming that there was no such conspiracy, and that the drain cleaner, the tarp, and the bungee cords were all purchased in preparation for the family's move to North Carolina. When it came to the forensic evidence, each defendant pointed the finger at the others. Colin's attorney told the jury that his client had nothing to do with his father's murder, and that it was his mother and her boyfriend who had the motive to want him dead. Laura's attorney highlighted the fact that most of the evidence points back to Colin. After a month of testimony, the case went to the jury to decide the fate of all 4 defendants. It took them 5 days of deliberation to arrive at 4 unanimous decisions. The first verdict to be read was for Alex. He was found not guilty of murder, but was convicted of tampering with evidence. Next was Colin. He was found guilty of 2 counts of tampering with evidence and second-degree murder. The jury acquitted Paul Tucci on all charges, citing a lack of physical evidence tying him to the murder. As for Laura, who was at the center of this case, she was convicted of tampering with evidence, second-degree burglary, and second-degree murder. Paul Tucci walked out of court a free man and continues to deny that there was ever a conspiracy to murder Craig. Alex Rideout was sentenced to 3.5 years for tampering with evidence and was released on parole in March of 2021. Colin Rideout was sentenced to 25 years to life and won't be eligible for parole until 2043, at the age of 50. Laura Rideout was sentenced to 25 years to life for the murder and 15 years for burglary to be served consecutively. Laura Rideout is currently housed in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York and won't be eligible for parole until she's 85.